Why is it that getting kids out the door in the morning can be such a challenge?
As an adult, it's just a habit, right? You don't have to use a lot of cognitive load or energy to deal with this. But if you're 4 or 6 or 8, it's not ingrained in there. Time management is a really, really big one. A lot of people with ADHD, they're what's called time blind, where they don't sense the difference between 10 minutes and 50 minutes. ADHD is basically, it makes it hard to get things done. And morning routine is like the classic example of getting things done.
What are some of the favorite strategies that can actually help the morning routine go more smoothly? What are all the things that might be on that list? Hello and welcome to In It, a podcast for families with kids who learn and think differently.
Here you'll find advice, camaraderie, stories of successes, and yes, sometimes failures from experts and from parents and caregivers like you.
I'm Gretchen Vierstra, a former classroom teacher and an editor here at understood.org.
And I'm Rachel Bozek, a writer, editor, and mom who has definitely been in it. Before we dive in today, we wanted to share some bittersweet news with you all. This podcast, which we've been so proud to make over the years, will sadly be coming to a close.
It's been such an incredible experience to share this podcast with you all, and we hope you'll keep in touch and check out some of the other podcasts Understood produces. The good news is, the full archive, 6 seasons, will still be here for you anytime you want to revisit an episode or discover one you might have missed. And you'll always be able to learn from understood.org, which has lots of other resources and shows you can continue to turn to for support.
But we're not done yet. We have a great show for you today. We are talking about the dreaded morning routine.
Oh my gosh. My one kid who's still in the house is a teenager, so more or less independent, but I still feel like I can't breathe sometimes until she's out of the house. Like there's going to be some sort of last minute disaster I have to deal with.
Oh, same here. Just this morning, we had a last minute emergency that was just like, oh, I need this thing. And just to be clear, we just had a weekend where there were 2 days and a Friday night to get all of this figured out. Yeah. And it was like, oh, wait, no, I need that right now. And now I'm searching the house for like a makeup bag. Why? I'm not sure. But yeah.
Yes.
Mornings are fun.
Mornings are tough. So the good news is help is on the way. Today, we've invited Jon Zeitlin to give us some tips.
Jon is the co-founder of HabitCoach, an executive function coaching service. He is himself an ADHD coach. He lives in Palo Alto, California, and has 3 kids.
And we're so delighted to have him here today with us. Jon, welcome to In It.
Welcome, Jon.
Thank you for having me, and this is a fun topic to talk about.
I'm glad you think it's fun.
We think so. So, Jon, as a parent, or perhaps as someone who grew up with undiagnosed ADHD, what comes to mind when you hear the words morning routine? Do those words spark joy?
No, I mean, like everybody, it was dread, particularly as a parent. When I was growing up, my mother was incredibly structured. She was a bit of a martinet, and the 3 kids all practiced their string instruments before school, and she just had us super well organized.
Wow.
But yeah,
That's impressive.
But when I became a parent, it was like the days of it, just the women doing all the work are over. And so my wife and I always shared this. So I have 3 kids, and one of them has ADHD. And the challenges came up when he and I were the ones that had to get things done. So I have one story. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay, so we actually were living in Costa Rica for 3 years when my kids were in early grade school. And so I would have to, get the kids ready, cook them breakfast, follow up with them. My wife was often on early morning work calls. And then I would get them into the car. And there's already kind of stress at this point because you've been through all the things of getting them ready. And I, in my mind, I'm like, I know I have 15 minutes to drive there, drop them off, 15 minutes to get back. And I'm, running a meeting with a lot of people there and I can't be late. So it's a kind of classic morning routine where your own timing is sort of getting in the way. So anyhow, we get in the car, we drive there, and we get to the school and we drop him off. And so my son, we'll call him E. So E's twin sister gets out of the car and his older brother gets out of the car. And I look around and he's sitting there and I'm like, "What's up?" And he says, "I don't have my shoes." And now I will say in his defense, it was a beachy area and the kids didn't wear shoes a lot, but there was a rule at school. You can't come to school without shoes. And so I was like, "Okay, just get out of the car. Get out of the car. So he gets out of the car. He goes in without shoes. And, I drive home. I change my meeting. I come back. I bring in the shoes and like, okay. And then, 3 weeks later, exactly the same thing happens. And it happened like 3 or 4 times a year. And of course, my wife said to me, Jon, why can't you just remind him to put his shoes on? I said, like, you don't understand. That's hard for me. Like, I'm trying to get all my stuff together to get the kids in and get to my meeting on time. I'm thinking about, I'm not totally prepared for this meeting. So it's that combination, ADHD is incredibly genetic. Sometimes that combination of the parent who's got some challenges and the kid who has some challenges makes it really, really challenging. We do laugh about the shoe thing now.
So, whether you are a family where someone has learning and thinking differences or not, Jon, why is it that getting kids out the door in the morning can be such a challenge?
Well, first of all, you're coming into this situation with some stress usually because you're trying to get to something, usually work or whatever you have to get to. So there's your deadlines and your kids' deadlines. And then I think the biggest thing is that, as an adult, it's just a habit, right? You don't have to use a lot of cognitive load or energy to deal with this. Like, do either of you guys have a checklist on your bedroom wall with all the things you have to do every morning for morning routine?
I have lists everywhere. It's part of my problem.
I do not.
Okay. Anyhow, most adults don't. I'm sure some adults do. But, after this many years, you don't really have to think about it too hard. But if you're 4 or 6 or 8, it's not ingrained in there. And so, there's probably like, really maybe 7 or 8 steps to a morning routine. And I think it's hard for parents to put themselves in the shoes of their kids and what that was like.
All right, Jon, so you said this is hard for kids to remember everything and they might need a list. What are all the things that might be on that list?
Well, I always start it actually with the night before because, if you're a young kid or even older kid, if you go to sleep at your bedtime, then you probably have no problem getting up. But if you go to sleep a couple hours after your bedtime, which so many kids do, then it's really hard to get up in the morning. So step 1 actually happens the night before. Okay. Then you have to get up and you have to get up on time. And these days there's like a huge industry of like alarm clocks that, because there are a lot of people who can't get up. So they get louder and louder. You have to solve a math problem before the alarm will go off. So for a lot of people, that's no big deal. But for some people, that's a big challenge. Okay. So then you have to do whatever it is you're doing in the bathroom, which is, multiple steps. And, it's easy to get distracted or forgetful, or you don't like to do it. Like, you just don't like to brush your teeth. Like my son, who I've been talking about, just didn't like to brush his teeth. I never understood that because I was like, it makes your mouth feel so minty fresh, but he didn't like it.
I know. Totally.
Then, of course, next thing is wash your face, which again, for adults, it's something that you don't really want to go to work without washing your face or having a shower even. But for kids, it's just not that high on the priority scale and it's easy for them to forget. So there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong in the bathroom. Okay, so great. Maybe you got through bathroom. Then you have to get dressed. But to getting dressed, you have to know what the weather is going to be, which is something, of course, we just look at our phone. We know the weather when we get dressed. But a lot of kids they don't do that. And so, in my family was often kids showing up in shortened t-shirts when it was, cold and rainy outside. Then you have to eat breakfast. Of course, eating breakfast, that sounds easy, except for if you're playing with your Legos or if you're on your phone or if you're reading a book and you're into it and your mom's trying to get you to eat breakfast and you're not doing it because you're so into what you're doing. Then you have to get all your stuff together for school. And if you have soccer practice after school and you left your soccer cleats in your car the night before and you don't remember that and you're running around the house with checking with their head cut off, trying to find your cleats and getting more and more anxious about it, that doesn't help some things. And then finally, let's say you've gotten through all of that and then, you have to go and get ready for school. You have to put your shoes on.
Yeah. I was waiting for that. Yeah. So what makes all of those steps? I mean, I think those steps can be challenging for any kid. And we know that morning routines are kind of universally tough. But what makes all of this particularly hard for a kid who maybe has ADHD?
Well, a kid who has ADHD, their prefrontal cortex is not developing quite at the speed that it would be if you're, without the issue. And so your synapses are not firing so well. That means your executive function is not as strong. And so there are a few executive functions that are absolutely critical to be able to do a morning routine and to do it independently. Time management is a really, really big one. A lot of people with ADHD they're what's called time blind, where they don't have a sense the difference between 10 minutes and 50 minutes. Switching is a big one. Folks with ADHD, they have very alive, very energetic, very curious brains. And when they get onto something, they go deep into it. So it's hard to switch them off. So if mom's calling up and saying you have 5 minutes to go and you're deeply into your, whatever it might be, your comic book, your video game, your book, your Legos, it's very hard for you to switch off that and listen to your mom. Organization, like I was saying, like that example of like, I can't find my cleats. They're in the car, and working memory because you don't remember that where you put them. So those are all executive functions. And that's, basically what ADHD is challenge with your executive functions. And, ADHD is basically, it makes it hard to get things done. And morning routine is like the classic example of getting things done.
Yeah. And I think a couple of the examples that you just mentioned kind of fit into these different categories of like inattentive versus hyperactive. Can you give a couple more examples that are maybe specific to one versus the other, when some of those factors are at work?
Yeah. I mean, ADHD is, the diagnoses, the classic diagnoses are inattentive or hyperactive or combined type. But the modern view of ADHD it hasn't quite showed up in the DSM yet, but in the modern view is it's really an executive function disorder. So attention for sure is a good example, but attention, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't hold your attention. It might mean that there's too much input going on. So you can't switch your attention. You can't hold your attention when you're doing something boring. It's a little bit more complex. But I think for parents, the best way to understand it is to think about the individual executive functions. So time management, avoiding procrastination, avoiding being impulsive, working memory, organization. And if you understand your child's brain in that way, then it helps them. It just makes it much easier for you to understand what's going on for them during something like morning routine.
And I know I kind of mentioned this a second ago, but for some kids with ADHD, they may also have sensory challenges. So like, for example, clothing, maybe putting on the particular type of clothing. Like, can those things slow down kids in the morning routine as well?
I mean, yeah, there's so many things that can go wrong.
Right.
For sure, if you have sensory challenges, like eating a meal can be a minefield if you have sensory challenges, right? Eating your breakfast could be a minefield. And the work of the parent is to really be a question asker, to really, really understand what's going on with the child, and when they're really young, even they may not even be able to express it that well, right? And so you just have to be like a detective. And if you're like a detective and you can really understand what's going on with that, it just makes your job so much easier.
I like the detective analogy. And I know you have strategies, and we do want to get into some of those. And so before we do, though, can you tell us what are some of the more rookie mistakes that parents and caregivers make when trying to help their kids, get their morning routines down?
Yeah. Okay. Well, my favorite one is the old call upstairs and think that it's going to be effective.
And, I still fall for this every day.
Yeah.
What if you're using an Alexa?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest with you, I had to really, my wife, like, she's got attention surplus disorder. She's got the opposite, right? And so I had to explain that to her. I was like, when you're calling upstairs to the kids, they're not hearing you, especially my child with ADHD. You really have to you walk up the stairs and get right in front of your child's face. In our family, we do this. We say, look at me. And my wife does it to me and I do it to my son, and we don't get offended because we know that's what it takes to get our attention. So look at me, you've got 5 minutes to go, before school. And you think that's going to work, but then, 5 minutes could be 5 hours, you don't know. So then you learn the next step, which is you don't yell, you go upstairs, you say, look at me. And you say, you've got 5 minutes to go to school and I'm going to set a timer. Okay. But then the timer goes off and they're still not ready to go. Okay. So then you go to the next level, which is look at me and the timer. And then you say, I'm going to come back with 1 minute to go just to remind you. And you go upstairs again. So it is more work on the parent, right? And especially when they're young, it's just, you just have to work harder with an ADHD child. There's no way around it, really.
So no yelling upstairs. And what about assuming they understand how much time it's going to take for something to happen?
Timers is kind of classic, tried and true of what we do at HabitCoach and when I'm coaching kids. But even timers don't work a lot of times. So you could train your kids, and we do this in our coaching practice. You can actually get better at understanding time. So we'll do these set of activities where we say go through 5 things that you normally do in your day and predict how much each one's going to take, and then time it and then compare your estimate to the actual. And then you could see if you're way off, you're always underestimating or overestimating. So it is actually, like a lot of these things, something that you can get better at, but you have to work at it.
I like that. I feel like I do that with recipes. It says it's going to take this long, and I have finally figured out, I need to at least add 10 minutes to that.
Yeah,
because
no,
that
that's
does
the
not work
recipes,
for
though.
me.
Yeah.
They all lie.
They all lie. At least for beginners, right?
Yeah. Attention's a big one in cooking, right?
Yes.
I love to cook, but I just so learned, like, if I go watch the ball game and they're going to come back, it's going to get burned.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, not to totally digress to cooking, but like when you said, setting timers sometimes is not helpful. When that's happening too often, just like in my life, I don't hear it. Like, I hear it and I'm just like,
Exactly.
Oh, there's that thing beeping. Anyway. And it's like, no, we have to respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that fade into the back, like the chart, like that's like the morning routine chart is going to be in every curriculum. Like, of course, we teach this as well. And a morning routine chart's good, but it's only good if you use it, because it fades into the background incredibly quickly for children.
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of that chart, what are some of the favorite strategies that you have that can actually help the morning routine go more smoothly? Maybe you could start with giving a few strategies for young kids and then maybe some older kids.
Okay, well, for young kids, my favorite strategy is parenting a whole, is I call it distraction theory of parenting. So like, and then they're in the tantrum phase, I'd be like, there's a bee on the wall, even if there wasn't one. But in morning routine, the corollary of that is to turn it into games. So before we lived in Costa Rica, we lived in Brooklyn, and we had a 15, 20-minute walk to school each morning through a million high school kids and terrible weather sometimes. And it was hard, and I had to get to work afterwards. And so we had, I came up with these games that we would play. So one of them I stole from Monty Python, which we called Silly Walks, where one of the four of us, me and the three kids, would have to do a silly walk, and then everybody else would have to copy them. Or we would do, the classic, would you rather be 100 feet tall and weigh 100 pounds, or 2 feet tall and weigh 200 pounds? Or my wife's favorite one is she would run ahead. She's a very fast walker. She's a very fast walker. And she'd say, run, 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 run. And the kids would run it. And so when you're doing that, they're forgetting all their distractions or the things that are bothering them or all the things that normally slow you down. And they're into the game. But you're kind of, you are manipulating them. You're getting them to do what you need them to do, but in a fun way. And you can apply that to any part of morning routine. And if you're not a creative person and can't think of like how to come up with a game, just go to ChatGPT and say like, give me a game to help my child learn to brush their teeth. And you'll get like 10 suggestions.
I like that.
Can I go on to older kids?
Sure. Go on. Yeah, go on to older kids.
With older kids, the trick is that you're trying to get them ready to leave the nest like a bird. And so, your temptation, of course, is to not let your child fail, right? Just parent them the way you always parented them, where you're, especially if it's a child with ADHD or executive function challenges, that you're really on top of them the way my mother was with me to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But of course, you're getting ready for them to leave. And I've coached some college kids where the parents are, tracking them on their phone and they know their class schedule. And, if it's, 8:55 a.m. and they have a class at 9, they're calling them to say, get up and go to class. And honestly, of course, when I first encountered that, it was like, oh my God, what's wrong with you parents? And then I realized, there are kids who do still need that. But when we work with high school students and we're working with the parents as well, a lot of what we're doing is getting them to give up their control little by little and let the kids fail. And the way you do that is by asking a lot of questions and giving them accountability. So, if they never do have their cleats ready to go and they have soccer practice, then instead of, screaming at them, which I've done plenty of times with my kids, but, it's all about like, well, I observed this happening. Why do you think it's happening? Why do you think you keep on forgetting your cleats? And then they'll come up with an explanation. And then, well, what do you think? What would be a strategy that would work for you that would, make that better? And you could do that with a younger child too. A strategy that they own for fixing their own problems is one that they're going to be much more likely to do.
Yeah. The college example, I'm just curious. So like, what tips do you have for parents of older kids who are about to go to college within the next year? Because I would think, oh, well, I want to track and make sure my kid's getting there because I'm paying for that. And
That
that's
would
costing me a pretty
100%.
penny,
I would be making that call. Why are you not walking?
How can you prep that so like you're not having to make that call that year?
There's a couple of things. I think first of all, like before your child leaves, they need to learn how, they need to be able to do their laundry. They need to be able to cook a meal. They need to be able to organize their stuff. Like you need to work on that. That, you know, hopefully that's already happened by senior year, but not for all kids. And then, you know, once they're at college, they're sort of out of your control, right? And so you can try and hectoring, nagging them, but they're not with you. And so it's really much more about winning their hearts and minds. So I have a freshman in college and his studying was I would say very inconsistent in high school. And now he's in college studying things that he really enjoys in a kind of a happier culture. And he's studying like crazy for the first time in his life. And I think it's just because he's into it. And I don't think we did that particularly. I think that was his decision to do that.
So it's possible that if the morning routine isn't working so well in high school, there's something about college that might help it kick in.
Sometimes, yeah. The other thing I would say is that transition from high school to college is much harder than most people understand. And we do a lot of coaching with first-year college kids because all of a sudden they have absolute freedom, right? And they're not that busy compared to high school. And so that, you know, you get a lot of kids who have ADHD executive functioning challenges who drop out of freshman year in college because they weren't prepared. So having a coach while that first semester in college is not a bad idea at all.
So do you have any final words of advice or maybe a pep talk for parents and caregivers who just cannot imagine their mornings getting better? Because sometimes it feels hopeless.
Yeah.
I've heard.
Well, I think the big fear is my child going to be okay? Will they be okay at a certain point, right? That's really what worries you as a parent. And so, you know, I would say if your child is struggling, get outside help, right? You don't have to do it all yourself. Like there are people who are professionals who do this for a living, who understand building executive function. You know, it takes a while. It doesn't happen in a few months. It happens in a few years, but get outside help. But the other thing I would add is that time is going to help. And it's hard when your kid is young, it's hard to really appreciate that, right? And so what happens is our prefrontal cortexes, they just develop and they develop at different speeds, right? And some kids, you know, they're still developing until they're 25 and some kids are still struggling because their brains are developing. But time does help. And so, you know, the things that really are driving you crazy when your child is 6 or 8 are still going to be there when the child is 15 or 16 or 18, but they're probably not going to be as bad because your child's brain has developed. And hopefully you've worked with them or you've had somebody outside work with them so they've been able to build these healthy habits over the years.
So we've just got to be patient then.
Yeah. I'm like, so we'll find out.
That's part of it.
Use strategies, be patient, and don't yell upstairs and expect people to listen to you.
Exactly.
I actually think that's a really big one, and I need to remember it. Like
I often do the yelling, and I really think now if I go, oh, Alexa, drop into so and so's room and say something like that's going to make a difference because a robot lady told you. Probably not. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for all of your tips on morning routines.
Thanks to both of you. It's been fun talking about these issues. It's been always fun to compare parenting notes. And thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yes, likewise. Thanks so much.